Australia has inked its biggest defence export deal, selling a long-range radar system to Canada. The $2.5 billion agreement makes way for the development of an Arctic version of Australia's Jindalee over-the-horizon radar.
It is far and away the most advanced long-range radar in the world. And just like Australia, Canada has large areas to surveil, and so Canada will use this to engage in surveillance over the Arctic.
Developed over 40 years, the Australian radar enables the RAAF to monitor northern air and sea movements across tens of thousands of square kilometres.
Canada just made a move that few people saw coming. Instead of waiting for others, it secured a powerful Australian radar system that could watch deep into the Arctic and spot dangers much earlier. The deal quietly strengthens Canada's defence while sending a message the world cannot ignore. At Parliament House in Canberra, Australia, two governments signed a document that immediately became the most significant defence procurement announcement of the week, and one that nobody in Washington had been asked to participate in. Australia and Canada signed a $1.75 billion export agreement to build an Australian-designed long-range radar system in Canada. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles and Canadian Secretary of State for Defence Procurement Stephen Fuhr put their signatures on the first phase of a pact that will provide early warning radar coverage from the Canada-United States border into the Arctic. The technology is Australian. The contractor is Before Anyone Else Systems Australia. The radar system was developed over 40 years by Australian scientists and engineers. The United States was not involved. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had announced he'd chosen Australia's radar system over comparable US technology shortly after he came to power last year. That decision, made in the earliest weeks of his government, is the one being formally executed in Canberra today. The choice between Australian and American technology for Canada's most critical Arctic surveillance gap was made by Carney before most Canadians had finished processing the results of the federal election. The $1.75 billion contract signed this morning is the institutional expression of that choice, now binding both governments to a joint development pathway that Before Anyone Else Systems Australia will support operationally. The technical capability the agreement unlocks addresses the specific surveillance problem that Canadian defence planners have been documenting for years. The Australian system works by refracting high-frequency electromagnetic waves off the ionosphere to detect distant objects that are invisible to conventional radars because of Earth's curvature. That is the fundamental limitation of ground-based radar. The planet curves away from the radar beam, creating a low-altitude detection gap that extends further as distance increases. Over-the-horizon radar bypasses that geometric constraint by bouncing signals off the ionosphere rather than transmitting them in a straight line. The result is surveillance coverage extending thousands of kilometers from the radar installation itself, across the Arctic Ocean, over the polar ice cap, and into the approaches from which any future threat to North American airspace would arrive long before it reached conventional radar range. Canada's northern approaches are exactly where this capability is most needed and most absent. The existing North Warning System, a chain of ground-based radar installations stretching across northern Canada and Alaska, was designed to detect Soviet bombers during the Cold War. It cannot detect low-flying cruise missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, or any platform flying below the radar chain's line of sight. Russia has been modernizing its Arctic military infrastructure continuously since 2014, adding new bases, extending patrol ranges for its Tu-95MS and Tu-160 strategic bombers, and deploying MiG-31K fighters equipped with Kinzhal hypersonic missiles that were not contemplated when the North Warning System was designed. The detection gap between what the existing radar chain can see and what modern Russian weapons can exploit has been growing since those systems entered service. What this really means is that Australia and Canada are now partners in terms of the future development of the over-the-horizon radar, Marles told reporters. There is now a very strategic dimension to the relationship, he added. That strategic dimension sits inside a broader bilateral relationship that Carney has been deliberately building since taking office. In March 2026, he became the first Canadian Prime Minister to visit Australia in 12 years. During the visit, Carney and his Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese agreed to increase cooperation on defence technologies artificial intelligence, and critical minerals. The March framework laid the specific groundwork for the June 22nd signing, a timeline of roughly 3 months from bilateral framework agreement to signed defense contract, representing exactly the kind of speed Carney described in his March 2025 declaration that Canada must do things previously thought impossible at speeds not seen in generations. As the world adjusts to its new strategic and economic realities, I can't think of a stronger partner to work with more than Australia, Foor said at the joint press conference in Canberra. The Five Eyes context gives the Australia-Canada bilateral its specific intelligence and operational depth. Both countries are members of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance alongside the United States, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand. Both are parliamentary democracies with Westminster constitutional systems. Both are Commonwealth nations with shared military history across 2 world wars and multiple subsequent coalition operations. Both have been managing complicated relationships with a shared ally, the United States, through a period in which American foreign and trade policy has created pressures across allied relationships simultaneously. The radar deal does not operate outside the Five Eyes framework. It operates inside it, while demonstrating that Canada's defense procurement decisions no longer automatically default to American technology when equivalent or superior allied alternatives exist. The acquisition timeline and operational sequencing of the Arctic Over-the-Horizon radar program connect directly to the other major procurement decisions Canada is simultaneously advancing. The $5 billion+ GlobalEye airborne early warning aircraft acquisition confirmed in negotiations on May 27th provides mobile, elevated surveillance that extends the radar horizon for fighter intercept guidance. The mixed F-35A and Gripen E fleet under active consideration provides the interceptor force that acts on the warning the surveillance architecture generates. The Arctic Over-the-Horizon radar signed today in Canberra provides the strategic long-range detection layer at the beginning of that chain, the earliest possible warning before a threat reaches the range where the mobile surveillance aircraft and the fighter interceptors need to respond. Canada and Australia have been Five Eyes partners for decades. They have deployed together, shared intelligence together, and operated as adjacent members of the same Western alliance system across every major military engagement since 1939. What changed today in Canberra is that a $1.75 billion defense contract formalized a new dimension of that relationship, one in which Australian radar technology will monitor the Canadian Arctic, with Before Anyone Else Systems Australia supporting both governments in developing the system, and with Stephen Furr's signature binding Canada to a defense partnership that Carney chose over an American alternative within weeks of taking office. The timing of today's Canberra signing relative to the CUSMA July 1st deadline is not incidental. Canada is 9 days from the most consequential trade negotiation deadline in its modern history. And on that same morning, its Secretary of State for Defense Procurement is in Australia signing a $1.75 billion radar contract with technology Canada chose over a comparable American product. That sequencing is the clearest single-day demonstration of the defense diversification strategy Carney announced in March 2025, not as a concept, but as a documented, funded, signed reality. The United States remains Canada's NORAD partner and its most important bilateral defense relationship. Nothing signed today changes that operational fact. But a country that is simultaneously negotiating a trade deal with Washington while signing a defense technology contract in Canberra with Australian systems it chose over American ones is a country that has already begun building the alternative partnerships Carney said Canada needed. Today's signature is the evidence.